Do you often struggle with the idea of taking a basic chord progression and articulating it into a full orchestration? If that's the case, then this video is for you. Hey, what's up guys? This is Alex, and today we're gonna see how to go from a piano basic chord progression to something like this. So this is based off a chord progression that plays in the intro of a Coldplay song called Yes. And in the piano, it sounds like this. So that basic idea is what you heard here, but it's articulated in a way that we're gonna analyze now. There is also a second different example, which doesn't sound so amazing, but it's this one. So I wanted to show you guys two examples because I want to impress upon you the fact that there is not one single way of writing chord progressions. There's of orchestrating chord progressions, there's infinite ways of doing that. And if you're looking for the secret formula to use for the rest of your life, don't watch this video because this is gonna be a very long, tedious, boring video full of information and full of takeaways you can take advantage of to write, many chord progressions. And it's not one formula, it's just many insights into my process, and we're going to analyze these two to the bones. Now, chord progressions and orchestrations are very wide subjects. If you want to learn how to actually write an original chord progression from scratch and by ear, I made a tutorial about that in the past, which I'm gonna leave in the description of this video, so you can check it out there. Also, if you're new here and you want to delve into orchestration because you want to learn how to write orchestral music, I'm gonna leave in the description a link to a playlist of all the essential and fundamental and most popular of the tutorials I made in the past. Because I made around 100 tutorials right now on this channel, so it might be a bit difficult to navigate your way around them. So I'm gonna leave the playlist there so you can check out the best ones and then get an idea what you can learn here. Lastly, if you want to be even more followed, to have a more organized roadmap to get from zero to hero in terms of writing orchestral music to the point that you can actually do this for a living, what I recommend you to do is to invest into our sponsor, which is called Evenant, which has a course called Cinematic Music from idea to finished recording that is geared to do exactly that. Take you from not knowing anything about orchestral music to writing stuff that sounds like Hans Zimmer, kind of. So if you go with that course and you really study with rigor and method, it really does wonders. If you're interested, I'm gonna leave a link to buy the course in the description of this video. But anyway, enough of that. Let's get into analyzing the chord progression. We're gonna start from analyzing the basic shape of it, which has features that are gonna be present in any of the orchestrations I made later on. Basically, we have here 3 colors. Each one defines one area of this chord progression. The purple color is the bass line. The yellow color color notes are the harmonic notes, and the green notes here are the melodic notes. Actually, the chord progression is this one. And the ba 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 is the melody soaring on top of that. Now, there is a reason why the melody is actually soaring on the highest notes here. The reason for it is that, as I mentioned in many of my tutorials, is that if basically the human here pays attention to the highest pitch sounds the most. If you have 2 different instruments playing at the same volume, but one is playing on a higher pitch, on a higher octave, then the human ear is going to pay attention to the highest one compared to the other, even if they're playing the same volume, pretty much. That's how our ears work. So that's the reason why in many orchestrations, you notice that the melodies are always soaring on top of the orchestration on high-pitched instruments. And that's what happens in my orchestrated versions of this chord progression. While the notes here, purple notes, are the bass notes that represent the bass line, and I use them as a reference for my bass instruments in those orchestrations. With the yellow notes here, these are the harmonic notes. So if, for example, we have a C chord, this is a major C chord, and the harmonic notes are the E and the G, which are, they pretty much determine the character of this chord progression. If I change the harmonic notes, we get a different chord, even though it's still C. So that's the idea behind the harmonic notes, pretty much. And they stay in between the melody and the bass line. In this example, in most of my chord progression as well, it's like that. And I like to leave the notes in between the melody and the bass for either the harmony or the counter melodies. So I place both in between, and that's what I did in my orchestrations. You're gonna see later. But you can even use counter melodies on top of melodies if you want the counter melodies to be more noticeable than the melody. But basically, what's highest is the most noticeable notes usually, unless you tone them down a lot in terms of volume. And what's lowest represents the low end of the track, and then the bottom, the foundation of the track. And what's in between is like the harmonies and all those things. So that's what happens in my chords here. So let's check out. I split them in bass voice, harmonic voice, melodic voice, and rhythm. Bass voice and harmonic and everything are the things that I just explained. Rhythm are percussion. So let's see how I orchestrated the first one. I'm gonna play each one, and then we're gonna see what I did in each. So the bass voice went from this to this. So what I'm doing here is just using double basses along with tubas. The reason why I'm using both is that I wanted to reach a broader range of octaves to have a thicker or more dense sort of bass signal. So the double bass is here. And the tubas are doing this. Actually, it sounds like it's the same octave, but these libraries are interpreting them a bit differently. But even though they're playing the same octave, their sound is a bit different. So I'll together as a layer, they just create a more thick low end, which is it sounds nice. I wouldn't have done this on violas, for example, because if you go so low with violas, then you don't get anything. The reason why you want to use the full range of orchestral instruments is that each instrument has its own range. Each instrument shines more on certain ranges of octaves and everything. So, it's like having singers. You can have Coldplay singer sing very high notes. But for example, if you have me, I cannot go so high as lights will guide, because that's not my voice. I have a much deeper voice. So I go like, lights will guide you home. So ideally in your orchestra it's the same. Like you want to use instruments that belong to the range you're writing for. So in the case of bass, you want to use double basses, tubas, they're amazing for that. Bassoons if you want. Bass trombones are amazing as well. Cellos, they can take care of the bass notes and also the harmonic notes and all those things. But I would never play like a high melody on tubas. So the idea here is for each range to use a specific type of instrument. And a cool thing to do, actually, if you don't know anything about these things, about instrumentation, this is what it's called, knowing your instrumentation. If you don't know the ranges of the instruments and everything, I think there is a cheat sheet on Google, like search for orchestral instrument cheat sheet, and you get like a graphic with all the instruments. But a cool thing to do actually is to just open up your contact patches and just play around with them. And open the bass patch, you see, oh, these are the notes I can play with the bass patch. And you just play around on the keyboard and see what are the limits, see where the basses sound the clearest and all those things. And you just learn, it becomes second nature. On the harmonic voice here, we're doing this. And this is where things start to become interesting. Now, there is a reason why I'm using way more layers here than I did in the bass voice. And there's a reason why this sounds way more colorful. Now, one thing you want to avoid in the bass, and I'm not sure if I talked about this in previous tutorials, but one thing you want to avoid in the bass is to have, chords playing in the bass. Because basically, it's a bit complicated, but when you have a note playing in the bass on low octaves, that note tends to have a more sort of like dirty sound, and also warmer but dirty air, in the sense that the harmonics of that note, for example, you have this note on the piano. If you check out the spectrum, you see it's way more full than if I take the same note and play on a high octave. See how much more sharp this is compared to this? Even if it's the same note, it's an F. But when you go lower, it becomes a bit more dirty and more full. That means that if I play chords on low octaves, like I play a low C chord, it's like, what the hell is this? But if I play it on high notes, it's totally well defined. So the reason why you want to avoid having like complex orchestration in the low end is that like the low end is best if you only play some specific notes, not too fast because that creates rumble, creates like chaos, but play like very clear, basic, and not harmonically complex notes. Now, the notes you play in the low end are gonna enforce the harmony in specific ways. So if I change the bass lines here, for example, here we have like C note and the F and C sharp and everything. If I change this, then if I move this to like, I don't know, G sharp, if I have the bass line on G sharp instead of C sharp in that bit, then in the whole harmony of things, the C sharp note is gonna be way, weaker. So pretty much the bass line is gonna add to the color of your harmonies, which is why, it's important to write a good bass line, and the bass line can change a bit of how the song feels, but you need your bass lines to be decisive, and clear and all those things. In the harmonic notes, you can go a bit wild, which is what's happening here. Let's check out each instrument on its own because I don't even remember what I did. We have the cellos, which I think are doubling the bass notes. They're not doubling the bass note, they're actually harmonizing on the bass notes. Let's see if I can enable them to show you what I mean. So they are just like playing harmonies on top of the notes we have in the bass. Another thing that happens in the cello is this. This is what you call a tremolo. Now, tremolos are very interesting to create tension because they have that sort of sound to it. They vibrate very hard. That's what tremolo means in Italian, pretty much like vibration, pretty much. Then we have some violas here. So check out what the violas are doing here. And again, they are harmonizing. These are the harmonic voices. And what you see in every instrument we checked out so far is that they all have these two spiccatos here. Sometimes it's good to change articulations, and that's what I did in this viola patch, for example. This is a thing that beginners tend to never do. And you can, these harmonic voices and everything, they're not taking away too much from the chord progression we saw before, but they are adding character because they are playing different articulations, like the cellos are playing tremolo. Here we have some spiccatos alternating with sustains. And then another thing we have, of course, is the modulation wheel movements here. So that gives the sort of like swelling feeling to the thing. So here what I did is I took those basic idea and I wrote them, but translating them for strings, which means having tremolos and all those things. I did the same thing with the brass instruments. So we have this bass trombone doing this. And as you see, pretty much this is not like this is moving around like so it's like it goes low and goes high and then it goes super low here. So that's a cool thing you can do. Now when I orchestrate this way, I'm not like super critical about, oh my god, am I using the same exact note in the chord progression? Am I doing like the C flat over the G? I'm like, no, I just do what feels natural to me. I try to keep in mind the main idea I had in the chord progression, but then I try to move my instruments. And a cool thing, like with the brass, it's amazing when you do it. With the brass, you go like high and low, like ba 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 ba, and this ba ba really makes this part stand out more. So just try to play around with it, And again, here I change with staccatos, marcatos, sustain. Basically, when I want to do this sort of notes here, I'm using sustain. When I want to do super short notes, I use staccatos. When I want to do something in between the sustain and the staccatos, I will do marcato. So this is marcato. This two, I think, is marcato short. And that's what the bass trombone is doing. I'd argue that this sounds more like a bass, like notes, sounds like more like bass notes rather than high notes. But the reason why the bass trombone translates nicely to the harmonic voice is that it's actually, you know, it goes to the fourth octave and it actually sounds way sharper than the tubas. But if I wanted, I could use the bass trombone as a low-end instrument too, because it allows you to go lower, you know? So if you go here, you might want to use it for the bass. But if you go higher, you can use it for harmonies. Then we have the French horn, which is like my favorite instrument for this sort of thing, and does something similar to the bass trombone, I think. Sorry, we have two French horns. They do this. I should have done this. Oh my god. But yeah, basically we have two French horns. One is doing this thing, carrying the melody a bit. Not the melody, the harmony. And just like the other instruments, it has like this sort of staccato notes sometimes. Because I put staccato notes in sync over many instruments because I wanted to give that extra boost. And that's one cool thing you can do when you orchestrate and you want to give some extra oomph to your orchestration. You can add staccatos and add them throughout your whole orchestration. So when you have staccatos on certain instruments, the other instruments are following. So you have a sort of like a tutti staccato on everything. And it's way more noticeable rather than having staccato on a few instruments and other instruments playing sustains at the same time. Because when you have a tutti staccato, it creates some breaks, some little silences in between all the staccatos, and that really helps into just making it sound awesome. In this case, some instrument though will play sustain notes, but for the most part, everything is like staccato. And so yeah, the French horn is doing similar things in terms of rhythm, and that's a good thing you can do. You can follow the same rhythm on different instruments, but make them go up and down in independent ways. That's what creates a rich harmony, because then you're gonna have chords playing in between those instruments. And what I do is I write voice by voice, which is a bit messy, but it helped me into keeping track of everything. So I wrote the cello, then I wrote the violas, then I wrote the bass trombone, then I wrote the French horn. Then after writing this French horn, I wanted the French horn to sound a bit more developed. So I added some scoops and crescendos, which are these guys. That thing, this thing is just great. It's like, you know, going from C4 to C5. It's just that. The scoop is where they do that. They go and they boost. It's this one short note that goes higher by one octave. And in this case, what it creates is this sort of effect here. That thing. I can even remove this if I want, right? But I think with this, it's way more, you know, believable. And underneath that, we have this crescendo, which should connect to the bum, bum. So the idea is to have this. But it didn't really translate so well because I didn't spend so much time making it sound amazing, but that's the idea. So you might want to use scoops and crescendos to carry on the tension, carry on the energy, to not let it die as you do, like you move to different notes. And I don't mean that you need to do this every single time, but if you want to give more, more power, you want to make certain notes more noticeable, then put a scoop before the notes or put some crescendo before the notes. But they need to link to the notes. Like in this case, this thing, again, it's not like here, out of rhythm. You know, in that case, it doesn't make sense. It's linked. It goes, it's just this connection. So you want to put your scoops like in time before a certain note. Like I see people using scoops and they don't link to anything. They use crescendos without linking to anything. So it's like your crescendo is like, it means growing, and you're growing to what? If you're not linking that to another note, or if you're not using crescendos or scoops for a transition or to link to a certain note, then what are you growing into? Like, why are you using it? So if you decide to use these things, use them as a way to enforce other notes. So what I did is I added the scoop only after coming up with this bum ba ba ba. Then I thought, okay, what can I do to make this bum ba ba even more amazing? And then I answered with, well, I can add a scoop and these three notes. So that's why I did that. Long explanation, but basically, the scoops are articulations that I think they're unique to French horn, or not unique to brass. So make use of them when you're writing brass. They sound really good. So all these things together sound like this. So as you saw, pretty much everything is following very similar rhythms, but everything is going in different ways in terms of harmonies, but they're all in key, and they kind of preserve the idea we had before from the main orchestration, the main chord progression. Now let's check out what the melodic voice is like. Oh my god, this is going to be complicated to explain because I just noticed I did a few things here and there that are like, what? So basically, in the beginning, we have this celesta doing this. And then it stops. I just put it there because I felt like in the beginning, the melody was a bit weak, but I didn't want to use like trumpets in the beginning and choir. So I put the celesta along with the flute, which is doing a similar thing. But the first thing you notice is that the celesta does the bam, 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 but also you also have this G sharp 5 note that just makes it a bit more interesting. I could take it away if I wanted, but I added it there just to add character, which is one thing I like to do with my instruments. Then I have the flute doing something similar. Now, here, the flute does the staccato, the bum, ba-da-ba, and then here, instead of doing that, ba-da-da-da, I decided to add more color and more character. So what it's doing here is sort of like a counter melody along with some, articulation. So it sounds like this now. So this that is called trill, and it's sort of like reminds us of the tremolo, but the trill is like is this pretty much. Let me open like the piano. That's a trill. That's I think major trill, and this is like a minor trill. So it's like two intervals being played at very fast like stuff. It's a stupid explanation, but yeah, it's just two notes being played in a certain interval at very fast frequency, and that creates that sort of like effect to it. Now, I use this to just, again, carry the tension forward, carry the energy forward. Another thing I did is, of course, using the modulation wheel to just make it dynamic. And as you see here, you have this trill here, and then na, 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 and that's a counter melody. That is going to play along with the melody. So, a cool thing you can do is to, this is just a simple idea, but I just decided to not repeat this melody again and just added a bit more character to it. But I didn't make it so loud that it would steal so much attention from the main thing. And in the second half, there's also other things that come on. So even if the flute was carrying the first half, in the second half, there's new elements coming in. So the new elements will be carrying the main melody, as you're going to see. Other than that, in the intro, we also have, in the beginning, we also have violins that sound like this. And they're layered with second violins that that play the same thing but on a higher octave. So together. Now, they still repeat like na 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 in the second half, but in the second half I took the second violins and I increased them by 1 octave, I think. And then we have the tremolo as well going on. Now, the reason why I did this thing where I increased the octave is that I felt as I orchestrated this that in the second half things were getting a bit messy and the main melody was getting a bit lost, so I went up an octave. So as I told you before, the things that are highest pitched are the things we tend to pay attention to the most. So since in the second half I introduced a few counter melodies, I still wanted the melody to be in the front though. I decided to go up an octave with the second violins, and I think I did that with the choir as well. Let's check out though what the trumpets are doing. So we have 2 trumpets that are doing this, and they come in after a certain point. So this is just a counter melody playing with the melody. The highest trumpet is playing the main melody. And again, on the highest trumpet because of the reason I mentioned so much in this tutorial. And I didn't want to do the thing where both trumpets start exactly at the same point, which is like when the second repetition comes in. I decided to introduce one trumpet a bit earlier. This guy here. Does it remind you of something? This is exactly what the bass trombone was doing before, just playing on a higher octave. And then we also have this, because again, this is like the powerful tutti in the middle, which this tutti here, this tutti staccato, wasn't included in the main chord progression. If you check out Coldplay's song, it doesn't sound anything like this. Just something I added because something I decided to add in my orchestration because I wanted this to sound a bit like this, a bit cinematic, a bit romantic, and everything. So that's why I use the tutti. I also have the tutti as in the choir. I introduced the choir with the tutti. Sorry, let me remove the trumpets here. So there is one layer of choir doing the main melody, and the other is doing the main melody and a counter melody. The counter melody sounds, oh my god, sorry. The counter melody sounds like this. And then you have the at the end, pretty much. And yeah, so, it sounds complex when you hear it, but when you dissect it, it's like, okay, you're just doing the main melody on different instruments, on different octaves, and in the second half, since you didn't want to bore listeners to death, you added a counter melody on the lowest layers of trumpets and on the flute. And you added some flute trills, and you added some tremeloes at the end to make it sound more interesting. That's all I did, So it's like basic idea, and then I added 2 details. And that's basically what I did. If I remove the trills and remove the tremolos, this wouldn't sound as impressive. For example, like it's still the same thing, but it doesn't sound as if it has a soul now. It's a bit like dead inside. So, articulations, they go a long way, really. So, guys, I highly recommend you to try them out. Now, the percussion instead, in this case, they're just timpani and cymbals and a few toms and tubular bells, which is a cool thing to do if you want to enforce the melody. So the tubular bell is doing this. Very simple. And the rest of the percussion is doing this. Now, the 2 most important aspects are this. So the cymbals that play exactly when I want the orchestra to be accentuated. So let me remove all the percussion and show you how the orchestra sounds with the cymbals alone. So what I did is I used, I think these are piatti and these are cymbals. I used the cymbals for the biggest accents. I also used some cymbal rolls at the end here, which rise in terms of volume and intensity because I have this dynamic wheel. Other than that, I did something similar with the timpani. So when you check out the percussion, you just hear they play on unison. What we have is this da-da-da-dun here to introduce the timpani. And then at the end, in the timpani as well, we have this timpani roll, which is a cool thing to build up tension or to build up energy and all those things. And then we just have some toms layer that just do the same thing. You know, nothing too impressive, just to bring more definition to the cymbals and to the percussion. So, you know, it's just everything is syncing in terms of rhythm. Everything is syncing on that insane tutti we had in there. And the melody stands on the highest instruments, on the highest pitch instruments. I'm not doing too many complex things in the bass, not doing too many complex things in the melodic voice either. I'm doing the sort of complex stuff in the harmonic voice, because in there, I can go a bit crazy. But even in there, I'm just playing the same rhythm on everything. It's just instruments going high and low, however the hell they want. Now, there needs to be a certain like rigor and logic in between that, of course. So you don't want, you know, your instruments to just do whatever the hell they want. But you'll get, like, you as you play around with them, you get there. And this is something that you might not be able to do on piano, because when you write for piano, well, you're writing for someone who uses two hands. When you write for orchestra, you're writing for like 60 people. So with 60 people, you can do stuff that you couldn't do with two hands. So, you know, just capitalize on that. You know, try to give character to each, but try to also have points where they sync, like the staccatos, and try to make sure that sometimes certain instruments bring more to the table by having particular articulations like scoops and, I don't know, like tremeloes and, you know, the trills and the things we heard before. Now, this thing about articulations is more important if you're writing a purely organic orchestration, like a very orchestrated orchestration. But if you're writing trailer music, like I tried actually to do here, if you try writing something that is more cinematic, more like powerful and edgy and a bit more like pop kind of, then maybe you don't need to have so many articulations. That's just something you can take advantage of. But if you want to write something that's more simple, then you can do something like this. Now, the reason why this doesn't sound so clear is that I actually messed up a little bit. I tried to do things way too much complicated, especially in the bass voice. I had to tweak this quite a while because I noticed I did some weird things in the bass. So let's check out what's happening in this second version. I'm going to be a bit faster now because I took already like 40 minutes to do the first one, when I thought this tutorial would take like 5 minutes to do. But yeah, let's check out what we're doing here. Okay, so here we have 4 different instruments, some basses, some cellos, some tubas, and bass trombone. Actually, the basses and cellos are the low strings patch from Metropolis arc, so it's actually basses and cellos together, but I just split them that way because that makes it easier for me to think and orchestrate and arrange my thing. Basically what I'm doing is, even though it's the same patch, in the basses patch, I'm using octave 3, in the cello patch, I'm using octave 4, pretty much, or higher octaves. And let's check out how each sounds. Like, the bass sounds like this now. Remember before when I told you to not have harmonies in your bass? That's the reason. Like, this has a few harmonies going there. I think it's because of the cellos. And that was very hard to, like, it was hard to reconcile the harmonies with the clarity of the sound. So that's why it doesn't sound so clear, partly. But basically, let's see what happens. So we have this bass doing this. Just to enforce the melodies there, the bass lines there. Then we have cellos doing this. And I think somewhere like it's not exactly correct and precise. My idea here was to just have this cello that just plays around and goes high and low and bum 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 bum. Because again, when you move the bass that way, you give more color to the track because you give sort of like in the harmony when you move the bass to a different note, you just change a bit of the color of the track. So a good example of that is actually He's a Pirate from the Pirates of the Caribbean. If you check out the bass line in that part of the song, that bass line is trippy. It moves a lot. It creates a lot of color. And that's why it sounds so amazing. Even though it's like this basic like staccato, you have that bass underneath that maybe you don't even pay attention to, but you just hear it. And it sounds very rich. And I try to, and even this is also noticeable in John Williams' tracks. The bass in his tracks is just amazing. And he moves it around. The bass line is so great. He moves them around in beautiful ways. But he knows what he's doing because he studied so much of music theory, I guess. I never studied music theory so much. So I'm kind of limited in that regard. If I start to mess around with those things that are a bit more sensible, I can do bad stuff. So I try to not go there as much. But it's interesting what you can create by having a moving bass. Anyway, then we have these tubas doing this. And the bass trombone are doing the same thing. This is an example of layering. You see, they're doing the same thing, but the bass trombone sounds a bit more sharp. So it gives a bit of air, a bit of, sharp edge to this brass here. And yeah, the cello is pretty much ruining everything though. But anyway, that's what they are doing. The harmonic voice here is actually pretty simple. Sounds like this. So in this bit, I think I messed it up by using this sort of like, but I wanted to add it there because it sounds cool to me. Anyway, so what we're doing is we're having this arpeggio, and this is something I don't recommend. It's just something I added personally. And the idea is to have this arpeggio that evolves with the harmonies and with the chords and everything. Because of course, like if you have this, that creates harmonies. Like you start to use notes, and if they don't fit in the chord that you're creating with the overall orchestration, then it's gonna sound a bit weird. So I try to move it around to sort of like fit in the harmony at that moment, and that created this very interesting arpeggio. When you hear it on its own, it's actually pretty amazing. But it follows a certain pattern. So this is one cool thing you can do. When you have arpeggios in your songs, you have some ostinato pattern, you can move it around. It creates interesting harmonic, outcomes and stuff. But yeah, other than that, which wasn't the best thing to add, but it sounded cool, so I added it. We have this viola doing this. And I'd argue we can remove this and just do this. Or we can do this. Which is what a beginner would do. But I think syncopated notes are way more interesting. With syncopated notes, I mean the notes in between each one of these. So bum pa 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 bum pa pa, these notes here. Sorry, these notes here. Those notes are there just to sort of like create a rhythm inside the rhythm. Inside these bum, bum, bum accents, you have these syncopated notes. And you can, do that, have syncopated notes in all your spiccatos and your percussion, whatever. And if you do like also velocity changes in between, because if you do this, it's not the same thing as this. So what I like to do is to have accent be bold and strong, and syncopated notes are just, make them move this way with velocities that go lower. And that can create a bit of bumpiness to your track. And another thing you see is that it's like bum pa pa bum pa bum pa bum 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 pa bum bum. So I keep it changing. Sometimes I have syncopated notes, sometimes I have this like bum bum bum. And this sort of coincide in the melody with some melodic notes, as you're gonna see that later. And as you see, again, they move around. It's not like bum pa pa bum pa pa bum pa bum pa bum pa bum pa bum pa. It's not these two things repeated to oblivion, I make it rise and fall. So yeah, let's check out. Yeah, there's other things I forgot to mention. Let's check out the French horn here. So what the French horn are doing are just accompanying the violas, but by giving them a bit of accents like this. Again, I'm using, as you see, the scoops. If I remove the scoops, this won't sound as good. I mean, it still sounds nice because of this bam, 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 bam. And this is something that just came on top of my head. But, you know, when you have the scoops there, it just creates that boost of energy that just makes things, you know, way more interesting. Then we have the flute doing the same thing as the celesta and French horn, actually. And constant harp, sorry. So that's the idea behind the harmonic stuff. And the melodic stuff is very simple. Sounds like this. So let's check out what each voice is doing. Here we have another layer of violas doing this, which is the main melody, playing an octave 5. And it's following the same rhythm as the violas in the harmonic voice. Exactly. Then, so that's just taking the ba 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 and making it rhythmic by using syncopated notes, using velocities, and having, you know, cool accents and stuff. Then we have violins doing what? I don't remember. These are actually, you know, this is the high strings patch from Metropolis Arc, and these are more violas than violins, but. And they're playing the bum 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 bum, sort of a counter melody that we heard again in the harmonic voice before. So it's a bit, they kind of blend together in this bit. It's a bit chaotic what I did here. And then we have this voice of violins in the second half. That just plays the main melody until this bit where I do this. Because I wanted to close it a bit differently. And then we have some French horn and trumpet doing, I think, the main melody again. Yeah. So it's da ba ba ba, but it's ending with ba 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 ba, which is a bit different way to end that melody. And then below that we have the choir doing this. So the whole melodic voice after a certain point does this thing. And they're all following the same accent pretty much. So the full orchestrated version without percussion sounds like this. It's like chaotic as fuck. Would probably sound better if I remove the cellos and the arpeggio there, but I like those. And this is just a sketch anyway. Anyway, the percussion sounds a bit different from the first one because I wanted this to be more trailer-ish. So we have this. So what is happening here exactly? We have some cymbals, we have some processed percussion, we have some dulls and toms, and some trailer hits. Let's check out each one very fast. So the cymbals are just, again, creating accents. So just like in the first one we heard, they play on specific parts. And there's Piatti playing as well. Then we have the processed drums. Now, when you make like trailer music, you make like hard hitting and cinematic stuff like modern trailer music. One thing you notice in the genre is that they don't really avoid what is called the machine gun effect, and the machine gun effect is hearable, I think, in probably here. This is like, there's not that much difference in between each of these like sticks. You know, the velocity stays kind of the same. But you know, that's in terms of like when you make trailer music, you want to make like hard hitting trailer percussion, you can use the machine gun effect. It's not a big deal. Although I would accompany that with percussion that actually have some velocity changes to them. So here we have this process drums. Just like in the orchestra, here for the bass, like the low end percussion, I use very steady and clear and slow and linear rhythm. I don't do pa 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 pam, pam pam pam. I do pam 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 pam, something like that. Because when you do like super fast stuff, it starts to muddy up your mix. Because it's, again, for the same reason I showed you before. And on the top we have this. So yeah, that. And then here we have this machine gun as fuck. Now these are not as low, so I can do this without getting into trouble and together. So this is the process side of the things. Here we have some dolls and toms doing this. Let me actually dissect this for you. The dolls from A Dio Epic Doll sound like this. Have this lower layer. And you notice there's this sort of like rolls here in between. That's something you may want to use. Just like scoops in between to bring the power forward. And then we have this. And on toms, we have other layers that are doing stuff. This. And this. So I'm not doing like necessarily different rhythms on everything. I'm just, some rhythms are slower, some rhythms are faster, but they're pretty much playing the same accent, and they are being accompanied by cymbals. So the whole thing together sounds like this. And cymbals are very important because without them, things sounds a bit more closed off. In this example, not so much, but in the first example, without cymbals, it wouldn't be the same. Other than cymbals, to make things trailerish and impactful, I added trailer hits, which are these guys here. And it's like 3 trailer hits that are changing and alternating between them, and in this bit, we have this. Like zoom, 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 that's like people slamming doors. And, you know, just doing this to bring more punch and more accent to the percussion, and then sometimes in between the trailer hits, we have this guy. It just brings power to the thing. Which is very trailerish thing to do. So the whole thing together sounds like this. There's like da 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 da, dun dun dun, da 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 da. You know, something like, what the fuck? It's like so many things happening. It doesn't leave you space or time to breathe. So that's playing underneath our orchestra, and it creates like massive chaos that doesn't actually sound so great. But it's like, you know, the second idea on how to orchestrate this Coldplay song, and the original orchestration sounded actually something like this. In Coldplay song, sounded like this. Well, it sounds way better in Coldplay song for sure, but that was the basic string idea. Here I took that and I worked on it. I added the tutti, I added the brass, the woodwind, and percussion, and here I just trailerized it and made it sound like shit. Sorry, Coldplay. It was way better in your song. But yeah, guys, that was the tutorial, short tutorial on how to orchestrate a chord progression. And there are so many takeaways from this. And that's exactly how I wanted this to be. I wanted this to be like an eye-opener and not rather, I didn't want to give you guys a formula. I wanted to show you guys a few things. But as you saw me do, ideally your bass line should be clear and linear. and your melodies should stay on top. And you can go crazy in harmonies. You can do cool things if you let your instruments jump around a lot, but you still need to have some logic into that. So try that. Try to write, start from a chord progression and write something that, you know, is based on the idea, but don't shy away from experimenting with articulations and moving things around, you know, because that's how you come up with good sounding music. And yeah, actually starting from a piano idea and then developing into orchestration is a good way to write music without getting lost into writer's block. And as you do that, just mess around, see what you like, see what you don't like, and, you know, stick to what sounds good and write your song. So that's this tutorial. Again, guys, if you want to learn more about orchestration, there's 100 tutorials on this channel. Some are more geared toward a specific subject. Others are more broad analysis of my orchestrations. So you can learn anything, you know, that you see me do, right, pretty much. There's also videos where I show you guys how I compose a track completely from scratch. So you see, go on the playlist tab on this tutorial, you're gonna see series of videos that are different in nature that can all help you into learning how to compose orchestral music if you want to get there. And yeah, another thing I recommend you to do is to get the Evenant course of cinematic music if you want to have a very, you know, tied up resource that's gonna take you from zero to hero in terms of writing orchestral music. It's a course I took back in my day when I was just starting out, and it was 1/4 of what it is now. So I highly recommend it because it helped me a lot, and it's gonna help you 3 times as much than it did with me in the past. So I'm gonna leave a link in the description to get that course if you're interested, and that's all for this tutorial. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.